How does firing Bryan Harsin and then searching for Auburn's next head football coach impact Auburn's recruiting?
Listen, put me in the parking lot, with Bears, and I'll go out there and play. It don't matter.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zac Blackerby. Thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. We are joined by John Garcia, recruiting expert, boss man over all things football recruiting at Sports Illustrated. And I'd like to thank LinkedIn Jobs for being the official college football and college basketball recruiting sponsor across the Locked On Podcast Network. John, in case you didn't know, it's been a few weeks since we've chatted, but Bryan Harsin is no longer Auburn's head coach. How do you typically see the next few weeks be as far as recruiting goes, right? Because winning December is such a big deal in roster management in this modern version, this transfer portal heavy version of college football. How do you expect this to kind of play out over the next few weeks?
Well, it's got to be fast. I think that's become paramount, right? Even before the whole transfer portal element was added to the craziness that is that roster management you mentioned. Now there's no excuse to push it beyond the end of November into December. That's kind of the window, right? I know that coincides with the end of the regular season, rivalry weekend, all those things, but really it's about the portal, both adding where you need, and of course, more importantly for new staffs, retaining the talent you want to retain throughout a transition. So speed is of course so important. That's why we're starting to see these firings earlier and earlier, right? Last year was kind of the tip of the iceberg from a precedent perspective. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of the same in 2022 with September, October firing. So these coaches, or these administrators, I should say, these money folk, as we like to say down here in the South, it can get everything in order to make their final pitches and use the backdoor channels, all that fun stuff we're not allowed to talk about, to make sure that they're in position when the time is right to click all the buttons and say, hey, this is the offer that you're going to be presented by School X. So time is of the essence. You have to do it as soon as possible. But of course, you need to allow yourself enough time to find the right person as well. So that's the dance that all these colleges are playing right now. And I think there's some obviously great jobs out there. But at this stage today, November 16th, midweek, you got to feel like Auburn is among, if not the best job available. And that's something the Tigers have to take advantage of relative to what the next couple of weeks could look like as other jobs open up. So, of course, fascinating, but you got to be fast regardless when you come out of this thing.
Yeah, and we'll mention some of those names, what you think the impact will be in a second, John. But you're close to a lot of Auburn's targets and a lot of Auburn's commitments. Have you spoken to any of them since Bryan Harsin's been fired? Are they just kind of waiting to see what's going on, or some into Auburn no matter what? What are your thoughts here?
Combination of both, right? I think when you talk about those that have long been recruited by the Tigers, there is an understanding of the culture. I liken this open gig to that of Wisconsin and Nebraska, where all three of those programs, it feels like they're either going to, at a minimum, maintain kind of their level of recruiting, or if anything, enhance, depending on how the coaching search fills out, because there is a culture, there's an understanding of what the university and the value of the program will be regardless of who the head coach is. So that's obviously advantageous for Auburn. A lot of recruits have bought into that part of it. Certainly Clay Whedon is one of them. I saw DeQuavius Story over the weekend, another Floridian, say, hey, I'm locked in, I'm done, not going everywhere, even though Penn State, Florida State, a bunch of other schools are at least curious in terms of continuing to communicate. And then on the flip side, you've got a few that are clearly going to be open. Janoris Wilson decommitted like the moment he heard Bryan Harsin was out.
Was that weird to you?
No, this happens every single year.
Did he think Harsin was not going to get let go? Like, he committed so late in the process. That's why I thought it was odd.
Look, some kids aren't as aware as we think, and some kids don't believe some of the chatter that does come across their proverbial desk. So he got his big SEC offer and he jumped on it, and then it changed, right? So I think that's a different part of it. And I think at that same time, his stock was sort of rising, right? He transferred high schools, Lakeland High School now, super high profile in the state of Florida, and other offers came in simultaneously. So I think that one makes a little bit more sense to just kind of take a step back and reset. Same thing for Terrence Love, I think, who's still committed, but certainly open to some of these other schools that are starting to court him. So sometimes the recruit just happens to be on a bit of an ascent while a coaching change goes down. But the reactions have been mixed. But I do think, just like we saw in the transition from Malzahn to Harsin, you're going to hold on to the majority of your recruits. So it becomes a question of how does the new staff inherit these recruits and then obviously attack late November, early December recruiting ahead of that December 21st National Signing Day.
I think the average Auburn fan's favorite recruit in this class right now is the guy you didn't mention, Jeremiah Cobb. There's rumblings that if you want Jeremiah Cobb, about to sneeze, you better keep Carnell Williams.
Simple, right? I mean, and I think clearly, look, Carnell obviously survived the last coaching change, and I think what he's done in this small window of being the interim coach, I think from an energy and effort perspective, obviously we see a jump, right? And look, we saw that at Wisconsin. I liken this to Wisconsin and Nebraska. We saw a jump in effort for both of those programs, but the difference is Cadillac Williams, no disrespect to Jim Leonard or Mickey Joseph at those schools, is such a legend, and it's so tied to that school. It's more recent, and it's at that position that you understand why he appears to be the no-brainer candidate to again survive a coaching transition. And look, Jeremiah Cobb is maybe your best commitment, right? I know for us at Sports Illustrated,
God, he's
as high a rated a guy as there is. We've Clemson's tried to flip him. Georgia's trying harder and more recently to flip him. There's a reason why, right? It just so happens he's a Montgomery kid and has loved Cadillac from day one, and that's always been what's pulled him to AU. Yeah. So obviously, that continuity will be important regardless of who the head coach may be down the line. But yeah, I think we see that every single cycle, and those holdovers are important in that regard for continuity purposes, but also just for the fans and the feel. That's so important. Again, we always talk about perception in recruiting, Zach. That is perception. Cadillac is his own perception at Auburn. You can't have watched even a snippet on Twitter or Instagram of what has gone down, a snippet of his interviews, a snippet of the energy, the darn suit by itself. Any of that kind of makes you say, okay, I get it. Even if you didn't know what he did when he had the ball in his hands back in the day. So I think it's such a unique situation. We're going to see a lot of interns in this cycle have an opportunity to either win the gig or stay on board. And I think he's as likely as any other on this list because of those reasons, in particularly what we've seen most recently. And it's hard to imagine that would go the other way in the next couple games.
Lane Kiffin has emerged to be the favorite to be Auburn's next head football coach. How would that impact recruiting? And what do you think the reaction would be across college football and this 2023 class and the transfer portal? We'll get John's thoughts on that in just a moment. Are you feeling like you can't get in shape? It's not your fault. As men age, men's bodies naturally lose free testosterone, the man hormone. It happens to every man, and it can make it more difficult to stay in shape and be energetic and active. If you want more energy to counter the negative physical effects of aging, Nugenix Total T testosterone booster with Testofen will help you turn back the clock, re-energize your workouts, get you better results at the gym, and help you look and feel like the man you really want to be. Nugenix Total T contains man-boosting key ingredients. Man-boosting is all you need to hear, folks. Nugenix Total T is the #1 selling testosterone booster at GNC. Nugenix Total T can help you re-energize your life and help you get back the powerful, confident, good-looking warrior you used to be. Now get a complimentary bottle of Nugenix Total T when you text COLLEGE, 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 to 231231. Text now and get a bottle of Nugenix Thermo, their most powerful fat incinerator ever, with key ingredients to help you get back in shape fast. Absolutely free. Just text COLLEGE to 231231. John Garcia, our guest today. Let's just play a game here. Let's just because this is fun to do. Let's assume Lane Kiffin is Auburn's next head football coach, which is awesome. I just smile so big when we talk about that, even just the hypothetical of it. What do you think the reaction would be to Auburn football targets and current recruits?
Well, let me put it in context here. What that name means to me in the state of Alabama. Back when Malzahn got let go, the only time I've ever pleaded for a university to contact a prospective coach was back then.
Yeah.
I tweeted, I said something like, Auburn, please, all caps, please call Lane Kiffin. Just if not just for the timeline, much less football and recruiting and all that stuff, just for the social media banter and the feel of entertainment that would create. That was before, obviously, this huge turnaround that he's put together at Ole Miss. So I think now he's checked more boxes since that tweet was sent off by yours truly. So now it's like even more like it makes so much more sense. Obviously, continuity in the state, the entire reverse of Bryan Harsin in terms of when he took the Auburn job, but he comes with a more tasteful offensive reputation that has now proven to become successful in a variety of ways, right? You've seen him do it with the passing game. Now he's like the best. All of a sudden, he's the best run game coach in college football. On the field, I think it speaks for itself. From an entertainment value, I shouldn't have to explain anything. Sure. But in recruiting, he has adapted. You know, everyone talks about Nick Saban's adaptations as the game has changed and as talent acquisition has changed. Obviously, he deserves his credit. But Lane Kiffin has adapted on the other side of it when you don't have Alabama's resources, when you don't have that script A on your chest that can sell a kid by itself anymore. Sure. And obviously he had that at one point. When you don't have it, he's found a way to supplement his roster with a combination of unique high school targets and, of course, a swarm of transfer portal acquisitions. So that recipe created instant success at Ole Miss, and I believe it would happen to an even higher degree at Auburn, just from a talent perspective, because there is more familiarity. And frankly, it's just a higher ceiling gig. It is what it is. Obviously, Ole Miss has been great the last couple of years, but there's a higher ceiling at Auburn, right? You have better pipeline states with the state of Alabama, Georgia, and of course Florida, where Ole Miss tries to get into but can't consistently stay in. The border states for Mississippi are Alabama, where we're just talking about, and of course Louisiana, where it's really hard to pull recruits out of there. It's a higher ceiling gig on the surface level, and if you look deeper, you get into the resources, you get into the prestige, and you get into other elements that, frankly, you know, Ole Miss can't compete with relative to the Auburn Tigers. So this would be whatever full tilt Lane Kiffin is, if we haven't seen it yet in college football from all perspectives, this would give him the opportunity to be full tilt, because it's ironic, right? His biggest complaint is NIL, it's the portal, it's the navigation of talent acquisition relative to what he used to be. Yeah. Now he's on the other side of that argument, as Auburn has doubled and I guess tripled down on their NIL philosophies over the last 12 months, really since the summer in particular, but over the last 12 months overall, it's been an overhaul in the NIL potential at AU. So now he'd be on the total other side of that argument on top of it. So from a resource perspective, it would also be something that he hasn't come across as a head coach. So it's just fascinating to consider. It would obviously be the biggest worry for the folks in Tuscaloosa. And again, I think it would be the most galvanizing hire in college football of this cycle, almost regardless or independent of anything else that could go down. We don't expect the craziness of last year, in terms of volume and in terms of surprise moves, Brian Kelly to LSU, Lincoln Riley to USC in particular. We don't expect that to a degree, but even if something like that starts to happen, this could still be the biggest lightning rod focal point of the entire coaching carousel, which creates its own momentum. So I think it'd be as big a home run as there could possibly be in terms of year to year or staff to staff.
Yeah, I think it would be conference altering. I mean, I think that it would be that big of a hire, John. And I did, I drive up to Montgomery on Wednesdays to co-host the Max Roundtable with Doug Amos. And Alabama fans calling in, like, they don't want it to happen. They don't want it to happen. I think there's some concern there. And the folks that call in and say, oh, it just won't work. If they hire Lane Kiffin, it's just not going to work. And then you ask why, and they don't have an answer. They can't explain it. To me, that's even more of a reason for John Cohen to do whatever it takes to finish this job.
Yeah, and there's irony there, right? Obviously, John Cohen coming from MSU. So this is, again, this would be outside of, something unprecedented, right?
Yeah.
Like, Dabo Sweeny or just somebody that's not even in the conversation, Ryan Day coming down to the Plains. Outside of those names that are just, no matter what they do, it's going to change things and shake it up. I think this is about as worst case scenario as it could be for the folks in Tuscaloosa, especially when you think about the now, right? Alabama's going to be very different going forward. This crop is leaving Tuscaloosa. And, his age is popping up. Nick Saban's age is popping up. It's becoming more prevalent on the recruiting trail with other schools in terms of the ammunition that they use. And Lane Kiffin, in a lot of ways, is the antithesis of Nick Saban. Nick Saban, old school discipline, defense, all this stuff that a lot of folks don't love as much as they used to. Lane Kiffin, youth, funny, social, offense. I mean, just the antithesis in every way. And he's worked for him. So he actually knows how he works and credits Nick for his development, his resurgence, whatever we want to call it, over the last 4 or 5 years or so. So it's a movie script, really. If Lane Kiffin is at Auburn, it is a movie script relative to Alabama and Nick Saban. And journalistically, again, it's why he's the only coach I've ever pleaded a university to call. It was a couple years ago in 2020, but obviously I wouldn't be mad if it happened in 2022.
What's up with Ole Miss people saying that Auburn's not a better job than that? That's crazy, right?
Outside of win-loss record and maybe tailgating in the last few years, I think you can easily make the argument, again, from a recruiting perspective, your pipeline states are better. Your in-state rival, which it's Mississippi State at Ole Miss, obviously it's Alabama. For Auburn, right, your in-state rival recruits nationally. So in the better state, you have a bigger pool for the talent because your enemy is going further away from home more times than not.
That's interesting.
Right? So even in state, you have a better opportunity at Auburn versus Ole Miss, where one, it's hard to get kids out of Mississippi, and two, kids grow up on one side or the other, and there's not a whole lot of pull relative to what's happening on the field there. You kind of are what you are over there. We see it fluctuate more in the state of Alabama. And again, Alabama's going to recruit California and Texas and Ohio and New Jersey just as much as they are closer to home. So that allows the opportunity, the ceiling for Auburn's talent acquisition to be that much better. And we just talked about it with Lane Kiffin, the resources. His top and chief complaint is NIL money, resources, and the pool that you're theoretically using as a backdoor recruiting tool. Right. That doubt, all those frustrations erase immediately should Auburn pull him away from Oxford. So I think 1-to-1, it's really hard to make the argument outside of, again, the on-field product in the last 2 seasons and, maybe some non-football items as to where Ole Miss is the better gig, a better record. But he's also part of the biggest reason why that has changed so often. So it's understandable if that's your school and that's kind of where you pull. But from a national perspective and even regionally, it's not particularly close. Auburn is a better job 1-to-1 than Ole Miss. John,
there's something that happened this past weekend, and it has a lot to do with recruiting. I want to get your thoughts on it. But Lane Kiffin, he had to see it. I'll explain what that is in just a moment. Today's show brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline is the best place to wager on all of your sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. You can get the latest odds and trends for every professional team and, of course, college football as it wraps up and enters into bowl season, and, of course, college basketball as well. Be sure to check it out. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. John Garcia of Sports Illustrated. So in Oxford, there was a top 10 matchup, right? And then in Auburn, there were 2, 3, and 6 teams going at it. It's been well documented. There were more prospects and targets that chose to go to the battle of the 2, 3, and 6 teams over the battle of the 2 top 10 teams. And what Jordan-Hare Stadium was Saturday night was crazy. It was immaculate. What Carnell Williams built and generated was awesome. Have you talked to anyone who went and was there at Jordan-Hare Stadium this past Saturday as a recruit?
Yeah, just a sense of wonderment. Like you said, it was just a spectacle to be seen. And I think the timing of it, right? Coaching change, Cadillac Williams, hometown hero.
Yeah.
The new facility, the reassurance of the future of Auburn from an NIL perspective, and a game where, look, even though A&M's record was what it was, it's still A&M, right? It was the most talked about program in the entire offseason in college football because of NIL and recruiting, the two things that, again, are factoring into so much of this search. So it was kind of the perfect storm timing-wise for Auburn to, remind its targets, hey, this is still something you need to check out. And I think, again, that's why I liken it to some of these other schools where culture comes before personnel in a lot of ways, because once you go down there and experience it, or up there in some cases, it's different. It feels different. That's why you're going to retain, again, more commitments than you lose, unless the new staff just hates all the previous evaluations or something crazy. That's part of the reason why it's about the school and its culture just as much as it is about the potential of its football program, which is still super important on that campus. So, yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Top 10 matchup, not as many recruits as the 3 and 6 matchup, but that's recruiting. That's what you have to build, and I think that's youth, and I think that's a lot of the ceiling and the potential of Auburn 1-to-1 again versus Ole Miss. Had great players on campus at Ole Miss, but the ceiling was much higher in terms of true star power with what we saw in terms of visiting the Plains. So that's a great way to put it. And again, it's the biggest home game at Oxford in however many years. And Auburn outdoes it with an interim coach. Really hard to beat.
John, have you heard any comments from Auburn targets and general recruits for them unveiling their new practice facility? I mean, that thing it's incredible.
It's so important. It's not talked about enough. I think NIL has replaced that, but we used to talk about the arms race, right? That used to mean facilities, weight rooms, locker rooms. How comfortable are you as a human being staying in the football facility? Which, every coach wants that, right? It just minimizes the opportunity for, bad activity or trouble or any of that stuff. Right. How likely are you to stick around in this football facility all day and night in between classes and whatever else you got going on? That number, that percentage, whatever it is, just went up at Auburn. There's really no way to look at it otherwise. I think the players' reactions, the current players' reactions, I think hit home. Really smart production there from the Auburn multimedia department. That's where you see the difference. So if the current players who have already gone through the recruiting process and most likely have seen multiple big-time facilities, if they feel such a jump at their own facility, just imagine what 16, 17, 18-year-olds are feeling having gone and visited. And I think that's another selling point for recruits to get to Auburn here before signing day, right? Check it out and see where it's at. We've seen some of these new facilities. I think Florida just unveiled one as well, where that's become a bigger part of the conversation. It's like a throwback. It's like that still matters. It's like saying education or playing time or winning still matters in recruiting, even though all we talk about is NFL and NIL. All these other elements matter as well, because every kid is a little bit different on top of that. So I think, again, the timeliness of all these things happening at once, it has been really advantageous for Auburn. And I think they're going to continue to spill that momentum into the new hire itself. And it's going to be, once this hire is made, especially if it's Kiffin or Dion and some of these other names that are out there, it's going to be one of these runs that we talk about going into next season. Like, now these freshmen are going to be able to contribute and help turn this thing around right away. And again, the precedent of this year is now showing us that that's possible, right? Look at USC, look at LSU, right? Look at these programs, look at Oregon. My goodness. First year coaching staffs with 2 or less losses in the top 10 with a lot to play for as the weather gets very, very cold. I mean, that's all you could ask for. And now the combination of that and the portal and NIL and all that allows you to do it immediately, as opposed to, we'll see in 2 or 3 years how it goes. The ceiling is a lot different nowadays. And again, the timing of all of this is just lining up so perfectly for Auburn. And I think they're going to fall forward.
John Garcia, thank you so much for your time. As always, how can people check out everything you got going on?
Yeah, well, bug me on Twitter, please. Alabama fans, John Garcia _JR. And of course, we're working heavy and hard there at si.com/college. New rankings coming out very soon. SI99 update as we get closer to our countdown to signing day coverage. So it's exciting times right now. Check us out.
You can find all of my written work at auburndaily.com. We'll see you tomorrow right here on Locked On Auburn.